there are modes of teaching that some of us may know, some of us may not have ever used before. But I really want to emphasize this as an educator and as a parent, how important it is that when we look at the Prophet ﷺ, he used very specific modes of teaching to his companions as well as his family and his children. And if we're not, seeing the wisdom and why he taught a certain way, and we're just kind of one size fits all, or we're, sometimes we get very habituated to a certain way of interacting with our children. But we have to really look at his example, and his example is the most perfect. So the first thing I would say is don't just direct act, because again, when you look at models of parenting, sometimes there's a conflation. There's people who think that to be in my authority as a parent, I have to be authoritarian, right? Versus authoritative, is where they just start to delegate, direct, demand, and that becomes parenting. It's just like, I'm just going to bark out orders left and right, and you better just do as I say, and that's it. There's no conversation. There's no explanation. There's nothing. It's just, I said it. Why isn't it done? That is not. That's not in line with prophetic parenting at all. The Prophet ﷺ was authoritative, not authoritarian, right? Authoritative is, he was obviously the authority. He was obviously the leader, and he modeled beautiful leadership. And so how, again, we just described it, but modeling is so important. So you have to act. It's not just enough to sit back and just, yell and command. There's there, or demand, I should say, because there is a difference. Demanding and commanding are different. Demanding is just, your voice. Commanding is that you're so in your leadership, so strong that children want to be like you. And so if you have beautiful virtues, if you have beautiful character, if you're doing what you expect, and it's, consistent, and everybody kind of has similar standards in the household, then children will want to model you. So modeling is really important. And then, when you're talking about, for example, things like empathy, right? And it's good to also share, stories of maybe examples where you had to practice these things, because sometimes we forget that children really want to know us as well. And if we forget to tell stories of our own because we're too busy, and if you're working full time and it's kind of like a very limited time, then you may not think that it's an effective tool to actually share your own stories. But you'd be surprised as how much personal stories really impact children, because they feel like they know you better. So I would definitely reiterate that. And then the second one is don't just say ask. So important. The Socratic method of teaching, Socrates, was to pose these open-ended questions. So instead of, just stating certain things, because sometimes when we get into an instructive sort of state, we just think we have to, lecture and tell, and that becomes very dry. Whereas when we are engaging our children, what we're doing is we're hopefully sparking their own critical thinking skills and ability to reflect. And so what that looks like is asking questions. And there's so many times where the Prophet ﷺ would use these examples where he would actually pose questions to the Sahaba, not directly telling them. And a great example, of course, is with Hadith Jibril. I mean, that's another, example of how this model works, right? Just to have, Sayyidina Jibril asking the Prophet ﷺ in front of all the companions, what is Islam, what is Iman, what is Ihsan? And they go through this beautiful dialogue in front of other people. But we can definitely use these examples. And there's many other times where the Prophet ﷺ is literally doing that. He's just asking questions, and then he teaches. So try that method. And then don't just show, demonstrate. And what I mean by that is we are in, again, the modern era where we've become very passive, unfortunately, in our parenting, and we rely heavily on media to just kind of do the work for us. And so it becomes really easy to play a video or watch this or listen to this, and we kind of just then walk away and do our own thing. But I think it's far more effective. And again, looking at the example of the Prophet ﷺ, to do what he did. He would use visual aids. Literally, he would draw in the sand. He would, make shapes. He would use like physical objects in order to impart lessons. Role playing exercises is another great way where if you want to teach your young children certain things, lessons, you can give them a role, and then you have another role, and you can just have this fun activity where they will learn a lesson through that behavior. And then, of course, as we talked about, reading and telling stories, but with animation, with creativity. Sometimes we forget that children live, especially before the age of 7, they're in a world of imagination, and they really need adults that are listening to them and with them and like present, and like who understand that their attention spans are short, but if they are creative enough and they're energetic enough and they kind of have the ability to capture their attention, that they bring all of this this creativity to the lesson. It's not just this dry retelling. So learn that skill, and inshallah, may Allah make it easy.